I think the oldest one was 1896. That really forecasted the CO2 concentration and how this will impact global warming and all the other. So I think it's not, in general, climate change is not the most, like, it's getting way more attention than in the past, but it's not the, let's say, the coolest thing potentially to do you with your time, because you can also just be saying, yeah, let's say it doesn't exist and I don't care.
The following is the conversation with René Haas, co founder and CEO of NeoCarbon. NeoCarbon is a climate tech company based in Berlin with a goal of combating climate change through capturing CO2 directly from ambient air. René comes from an industrial engineering background and has been an active part of the Berlin startup ecosystem for several years now. Before NeoCarbon, he was head of business development at Tink, a fast growing Berlin startup in the field of smart home devices. There, he advised and supported the founding team in growing the team, led the fundraising strategy, and successfully raised over 50 million, scaling the company to over 100
Yeah,
people.
we do carbon removal, so remove CO2 from ambient air, leveraging existing infrastructure. So yeah, in general, very often the big misconception is avoiding of CO2 emissions and active carbon removal. So meaning basically a bit like turning back time, so removing CO2 from ambient air. And so
Mhm.
what we are doing is we're not stopping emissions entering the atmosphere, but we rather help already removing CO2 that has been emitted in the atmosphere.
Mhm.
So for us, what was the inspiration? We looked at the technologies which have been out there for already, 13, 14 years, I would say. And we'll different, maybe can we do some chemical innovation? Can we apply them in a different field? And our approach was at the end to apply them in a different field, so in a different setup compared to what was out there. But throughout the process, we realized that we also have the capabilities within the team that grew over time to also innovate within the technology. So what we are doing now is we retrofit existing infrastructure, like especially if you have an industrial site and you have a lot of waste heat potential in the low temperature ranges, so meaning 100 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Celsius,
Mhm.
and we integrate in those systems. So ideal partners are, for example, within cement or waste incineration.
Mhm.
And then we have developed our own, we call it novel reactor. So basically, where the chemical reaction is happening at the end. There
Mhm.
is where we innovate as well.
Would love to understand a little bit detail on how the process works.
Yeah. From process wise, we are working with a so called temperature vacuum swing, meaning we have basically a big box, like our current unit is 2 by 2 by 1 meter 50. Through this box, in this box, solid chemical, which is very attractive to CO2. So the CO2 from ambient air gets trapped onto the chemical after
Mhm.
a certain time. So normally 2 hours, the material is saturated, so it can't capture more CO2. And yeah, why carbon removal is obviously so we are not cutting our emissions
Yeah.
fast enough, so to say. And of course, there will always be certain emissions which we unfortunately can't avoid. So especially, for example, in agriculture or aviation. That's why
Mhm.
all the scientists basically say that by mid of the century we need 6 to 10 gigatons of carbon removal, so per
Mhm.
year. And just to put this in perspective, Germany is right now emitting zero point 0.8. So we need to
Oh wow.
get like a lot of times, like more than 10 times out of the air what Germany is emitting right now, which is massive. Yeah.
So for the longest time, this tech, at least from what I have read, seemed to be not cost effective. How are you different in that sense that you think you will be able to achieve that scale at the cost?
Yes, so costs are really big challenge because when you think of CO2 in ambient air, it's such a big driver of climate change, but the share is so small that you have basically, when you want to remove it from ambient air, you need a chemical that is very attracted by to CO2. And so you need a very strong bond in the first place to capture it. But then you need of course, a lot of energy to get rid of this bond again. So that's why that's driving the energy costs basically. And what we do different is that we basically looked, okay, wait a minute, is there any waste heat out there in the right temperature ranges for us already on a global basis that we could use instead of creating those energy basically from scratch. Maybe we can use the energy which is available. And we did a, let's say, global analysis on different industries and realized that actually with the current waste heat available globally, we have the removal potential of 5.3 gigatons. Of course, maybe we don't use every of those systems, but the potential is massive. So we've been looking into this and where we think, okay, there's really a big scaling potential. And then besides the so-called more, I would call it more as a, let's say, certain business innovation, so to say, or where to apply your product, we realized that we're still working with a temperature vacuum swing. So how I described it, with using temperature to release the CO2. But a lot of the current systems work with a so-called packed bed. So they have you can imagine it like a big bag full of sand, like very small pellets, where the CO2 gets trapped onto it. So this is the chemical. And instead of this big bag of sand where you basically blow air through, we said, okay, we work on a monolithic structure. So where you don't have a million pieces moving around within your reactor. So that's besides the integration. This is more the technical integration, that we have one big block instead of like millions of pieces moving around, which means they also degrade over time. They rub on each other, and then they block your vacuum chamber. So there are a lot of disadvantages in this model, which is also, of course, driving costs, and is also very bad for the reliability of the system. So that's why with our approach, we think we are way more reliable, and also our chemicals last way, way longer than they would normally do.
So all of this CO2 that gets collected, is there a utility for this?
Hmm?
How do you kind of deal with what is collected?
Yeah. In the early days, we looked at, okay, what are the markets? Because there is no no market right now for carbon removal. It's all in the building up process, so to say. So we looked at different industries that need CO2 as a feedstock. Of course, this would not, depending on the process, would not be carbon negative, of course, but it would help to learn from the field. So we realized that, for example, vertical farmings, greenhouses, are the first users of CO2 because they have comparably high price points, but let's say their demand on, for example, the quality of the CO2, the purity, is not that high. So also our price point can be comparably low. So that's why the first is about utilizing it as a, for example, in farming. But in the long run, of course, especially when you try to decarbonize aviation, then you need something called SAFs, so sustainable aviation fuels. And for that, for example, you need CO2 as an input product. But there are also a lot of other chemical processes that are based on fossil CO2, which will be hopefully in the future be powered by directly air captured CO2, that we really create a circular economy around CO2. But of course, I still believe that unfortunately we have emitted too much. So there need to be a certain, let's say, government incentive structure to actually also capture and store CO2. And that's what's happening now already in the US. So US government is investing 3.5 billion into this. And also the European Union is, of course, making a lot of efforts, for example, with the Northern Lights project, to really store CO2 long-term underground. And there might be actually also government targets for a certain share of carbon removal within their net zero strategy, because achieving net zero without so-called negative emissions, it's basically impossible.
Yeah. So, in terms of a business model, who is your customer?
Yes. So in the early days, for us, it's about building units and selling them to, for example, vertical farms. So that's really the early days. But over time, so especially in the next 1 2 years, we rather want to partner with companies, meaning we're looking for one partner that has the waste heat side, and that gets incentivized from us because we take the waste heat from them. And then a carbon removal buyer is purchasing carbon removal certificates. So the long run will work with carbon removal certificates, which are right now voluntary. So they are not mandatory, at least not in the EU yet. And in the very, very long run, when the tech is so mature enough, so to say, to license it, our ideal case would be to license it to big industrial players, so they can basically do the rollout of the technology. Because when you think of the scale we need to reach, it will be nearly impossible to do it as a startup because you will potentially need really billions to build those plants. And this can be rather done via a big corporate, but this would be really down the road, probably a couple of years.
Yeah, makes sense. So, how did you even get started? This seems like a massive endeavor. This is deep tech, really, in a sense.
Yeah, like my background was always in energy and resource. So that's how I did my master in industrial engineering. Then I worked a bit I worked in R&D for Siemens Energy on large gas turbines, and then in the consulting for a lot of energy players. And over the time, I then worked in a startup where I was building business units. So really leading people, like more than 100 people at a time. Like I had on the one hand my engineering background, so to say, from my studies, and on the other hand, a startup experience. And so I wanted to combine those. I looked really, what can I do? So basically, one year I was just looking into carbon removal and okay, what can we do? How can we do it? I talked to everybody in the field that is relevant, so to say, and I tried to find my way. And after 9 months of looking into it, I basically found my co-founder, Sylvain, and then we still, I would say, we had our head against the wall, and we just tried to come up with, okay, what can we do different? What can we do different? So it was not like, let's say, a unique inspiration, so to say, but rather, of
Mm,
course, developing over time. So then with him together, we found, hey, maybe we can apply it in existing infrastructure. And then
mhm,
when our head of R&D, Andrew, joined, we realized, hey, maybe we can apply it in existing infrastructure, but we can also innovate on the reactor, which will be a massive cost benefit for us in the future. So it's more developing over time, so to say, but it was not, let's say, one yeah magic inspiration, so to say. I think that's very hard to come just up with this.
I'm sure the background helped. Clearly, have the background to kind of arrive at this. What do you think about the money that is going into this space? At least from what I've read, not enough billionaires are interested in investing into DAC. I think Elon Musk has a price of around 100 million or something
Yes.
he's put on behind this, but there's nothing much that I've read by the big billionaires. Do you
Mhm.
think they should make a bigger contribution to this space?
Like there are some people that actually do it from that are really, like, let's say, the richest 500 people of the world that really invest in this. For example, one case is Climeworks, which is like the biggest company in the field. But in general, I believe the contribution, especially of the, let's say, richest 0.001% of the world, should be way higher. Because when you think of, okay, what is the average, let's say, billionaire emitting, what is the average person on the planet emitting, and so on. So the shares should definitely be higher. And we really need people that built this early industry because it's still the early days of that tech. So we will need a lot of money. And I think, especially if you are at the really top, you should have the, let's say, capacities to afford it, so to say. Yeah, would definitely emphasize on this. And if there is anybody, of course, happy to talk about this and explain the problem more in depth. Like, why do we need carbon removal? Why is it also so urgent to scale it now in 2024?
Yeah, no. Why do you think that is the case? Why not enough investment has gone into this space? Do people assume that this is too steep a climb, or
Uh, nah, it's like you could ask yourself in general, why didn't we do all the climate action we could have done since the 1980s?
yes, yep.
So there are scientists out there that actually said, I think the oldest one was 1896, that really forecasted the CO2 concentration and how this will impact global warming and all the other. So I think it's not, in general, climate change is not the most, like, it's getting way more attention than in the past, but it's not
Yep.
the, let's say, the coolest thing potentially to do you with your time. Because you can also just be saying, yeah, let's say it doesn't exist, and I don't care. And especially depending on how wealthy you are, not really impacted by it. So I think that's one of the reasons for the people. It's very far away from their normal reality. And especially carbon removal it's even further away, so to say,
Sure.
because you
So,
could also do, of course, other actions as
yeah.
well. besides carbon removal.
Plus, I think you don't really see things in the air, right? I mean, people walk out and they still see a clear sky, and they're like,
And I, of course, I like the sun. I like it warm. Let's have summer all day. It's like, why is it a problem that like,
it's a
and then people say, look, it's raining in Germany. It's so cold. Climate change doesn't exist. And you're like, okay, sure. So also people forget a lot about this, and they also like you have a lot of things that happening within climate change. So for example, also know probably this shifting baseline syndrome. So people are not aware how the world has been, for example, 40, 50 years ago. So you always compare to what you see now, and to understand it on a global scale is really, really the big problem. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
In terms of some of the key challenges you're trying to solve as a company in the next 3 to 6 months.
Like for us, the next 3 to 6 months is really deploying our first unit to a customer. So
Mhm.
very luckily, we got a Japanese industrial player that is willing to work with us. So with them, we will do the first project. We already ordered all the pieces. We are now doing assembly, and hopefully end of Q1 we can deliver it and then really run the tests and see how this machine works in the real environment, integrated at the customer. So yeah, this will be, yeah, by far the biggest challenge, I would say.
Nice. And how did you end up getting this customer? Like, how did you land your first customer?
They found us actually. When the thing is, when we started the company, we looked, okay, where do you need to be when you are a carbon removal player, when you are a capture company? And so we've tried to be at all the relevant conferences, at all in all the relevant, let's say, associations, so that
Mhm.
everyone who's looking into the space can basically find us. And that's how they found us at the end.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that's how it happens. So more help them finding you instead of like actively trying to convince them. But of course, we also do a lot of cold reach outs and just trying to connect with people.
Startup, actually, the founding team early on has to sell a lot, hit these events. How do you kind of for it?
So when we're really looking, okay, what are the relevant events for our industry, and we when we go there, we try really to be on stage, so that we say, meaning where we can present to 200 people, and then it's very
Mhm.
easy to see to get the most out of the event. So if I would just go to an event and randomly talk to people, that's very hard. So before, normally we make a list, to whom do we want to talk, are there enough relevant people there, and ideally we are on a, maybe not the main stage, but at least on a small side stage, and everybody who is interested will join there anyway, but that we are always present, and that I'm always can talk to minimum like 20, 30 people at the same time while being on stage. So that's really the thing what we are looking for when we go to events.
And what's the potential implication of the tech you have on, let's say, in the next 5 years? What kind of impact do you think NeoCarbon will make?
Mhm. Of course, right now we are just capturing a couple of tons per year. So right now the amount is still very small, but we are aiming for 1 million tons by 2030, which would mean
Oh,
quite some installations. So talking about, yeah, a couple of hundred. There, of course, depending how big one installation might be. So with one installation, which we are now actually negotiating, we actually have a removal potential of 30,000 tons per year. So then you would need a bit less, but really depending on the size, we aim for the 1 million for 2030, and then for 2050, which is like the long run goal, we try to aim as high as possible, but it will be very hard to achieve the, for example, gigaton scale, because said, when you think of whole countries, they are not even emitting a full gigaton. So removing a full gigaton as one company might be very hard.
hmm. And so, do you envision the evolution of the carbon capture technology itself? What you are doing is an evolution in a way. Think there are better iterations you already have in mind in terms of tech?
Like I think I'm really looking forward to see our monolithic reactor in the field, because this, I think, can really make a difference. Where I
Mhm.
think, or where I hope the whole carbon removal market, for example, will go by 2030 is 85 megaton. Yeah, and there we would then have a certain share of, let's say, 1-2% of global market. But yeah, right now, of course, the current capacities globally is like 10,000 tons for direct air capture, which is they basically for climate
Nothing
change.
yet.
It's a village. Uh,
So, does
someone else enter this space, specific role you're looking to fill soon, so
Hmm.
people can join this cause or mission?
Like on the more, let's say, product side, engineering side, we have quite a strong team by now, I would say. But
Mhm.
especially a head of engineering would be very interesting for us, which is more like a mechanical engineer, ideally with 15 years of work experience, so more senior person, ideally from, let's say, a big company, Bilfinger, Siemens, something like this, like who really has like strong industry experience. This is a role we want to fill, ideally in Berlin, ideally German speaking, because he would need to talk to a lot of suppliers in German. This would definitely help. In general, we are a super international team, so German actually is a bottleneck within the company. But yeah, for this role, it would be, I think, beneficial. On the business side, we are quite well, I would say, there, which is mainly working with me. We're looking for some interns, but also for a working student, which is helping us with grant applications. So, yeah, public money. Of course, there, especially the working student, German native, ideally, because the grant application needs to be quite often in
Yeah.
German.
Mhm.
And but for the interns, there we are more flexible. So there, German is not a strong requirement, but rather someone who is more like a business background, English speaking, totally fine, and with, of course, a high intrinsic motivation. Yeah, I think that's what we all have in common at NeoCarbon.
And how big is the team right now?
Right now, we are, yeah, roughly 10 full-time people, and
Mhm.
then a couple of interns, working students. So overall, 13 to 15.
Nice. I think taking off a startup is such a journey. What advice would you give to entrepreneurs or would be entrepreneurs who are looking to innovate in, especially in the climate tech sector?
For me, and I think that's what we both have in common, is that the co-founder is very important. So really try to find the right co-founder. For me, it took me, yeah, at the end, 9, 10 months to find my co-founder, but I think it's really core to really good with him or her as a person, so that you really want to spend so much time with this person because it can be so intense. In particular, for my space, where I would wish other entrepreneurs to start companies, to innovate, would
Mhm.
be for me, especially on the sequestration side. So how to store CO2 or what to do with the CO2. Meaning, for
Mhm.
example, if you can create novel materials out of CO2 or completely new ways on what to do with CO2. This is definitely a huge field of innovation. And
Mhm.
another more, I would say, potentially more a software game would be more about educating people around carbon removal, because even for sometimes I talk to very big energy companies and they are not aware, okay, what's the difference between avoidance and removal, and there's often a misconception.
Mhm.
Something that makes it easy to convince people why carbon removal is such an essential part of fighting the climate crisis and making people aware of that. So those are two things where I see a big potential, because for a lot of people it's still like a bit of rocket science what we do, but it's not that, yeah, crazy, so to say, I would say.
Nice. Um, so we will answering all these questions on technical front. Probably move towards on the founding journeys. Few questions on the founding journey itself, so that across the space can learn from your founding journey. You typically unwind as a startup founder, especially given the space you're in. What kind of time do you have to put in towards this?
Like I'm now 2 years in, I would say, a bit more, and
Mhm.
it's that the amount of hours is really crazy, I would say, in general, and especially the amount of energy, because especially at the beginning I was always tired, because you always try to give your max and you wanted to get it off the ground, and it just takes all your energy. Like, of course, I did a lot of sports at the side, but at the
Mhm.
end, it's really just you need to sit there, you need to work with your co-founder, and you would just try to do to everything. What is very good is that you really get rid of your ego super fast. So you are not shy anymore for anything. You just try to, let's say, 3 days after we had the idea, for example, we talked to one of the most senior experts in the field, a professor from the US. He destroyed us. He didn't like it at all. And you just like you go to so much, let's say, negativity, that
Mhm.
sometimes this can be very hard. Sometimes you are super strong and you say, okay, now I got 30 rejections, 40 in a row. I don't care. I just
Yeah.
move on. But sometimes it's just too much. And then you, let's say, need to take a step back. That's what I then quite often do. I then do sports. I try to be in nature, try to be with my parents or in my hometown. So I try to find my ways to have a bit of distance. And then normally new ideas come, but then it's a lot again the energy. So it's really really intense, and I think I like those ups and downs because the highs can be very high, and you think, oh, that's really the best thing I could do with my whole life. But then the downs are when, for example, let's say a customer, it doesn't work out, or your machine breaks down. You don't know why. That happens. That's normal. You innovate, so you fail. That's normal. But when and you notice, but when you are in there, it can be very hard. That's why I also emphasize so strongly on my co-founder, for example, and I'm so happy with him because we really, like, sometimes he has a hard time, sometimes I have a hard time, and it's really good to help each other out. And I really think like that there are people, of course, that are solopreneurs. I don't know how they do it. I don't know that they are really different. I don't know.
Yeah.
Some of my friends do it, but I could never do it. I really think like the co-founder is so important because the energy you need is so crazy, and you really need to be able to be everything at once. You should be able to do so many things. So when we started, I didn't expect that it will be that intense, even though I worked with a founder for more than 3 years together. But doing it yourself is a different game.
Different
And
ballgame.
then a lot of very good things happen. So we didn't imagine that it will be that great, to be honest.
Yeah. You found a co-founder that good match. It's almost like a marriage to find a co-founder.
Yes.
Entrepreneurs probably have a good support system.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. Like otherwise, it will be. It's just hard. Of course, it depends also what kind of business you are building. I think a bit like if
Yeah,
let
of course.
yeah if
So now you're here. Did you imagine starting a company, or what did you want to be as a kid?
very hard to say because so many things happen in my life that remembering things is very hard for me. So
I
it's
can understand as a founder. Yeah.
yeah, it's sometimes a bit weird how many things you forget because you have so many things happening. Like I don't remember what I wanted to be. I know I always was a big fan of freedom. Like I want to make decisions my way. I was always, even as a kid, when I was like 8, 9, I was always working super hard. It was just natural in me. No one forced me for results, for example. No one actually in my family they didn't even want that I study, for example. It was not something like, no, be a child, enjoy life. I said no,
Okay,
I
you.
want to, like, it was always within me, this energy, but also this demand for freedom at a side in total. So I tried a lot of different business ideas, a lot of different tracks before I ended up then starting NeoCarbon. So it was many years with a lot of time, which didn't lead to any success or any big success. So as a child, I don't know. I was often in the forest, so probably something in the forest, something outdoors, and not only on the laptop, which I will still enjoy a lot. Probably something like this field, potentially. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, outdoors is good. Yeah, who wouldn't mind getting out?
yeah.
You kind of do advice for.
Like we had a lot of advice, we had a lot of mentors over time. So what especially I try to do, I try to look, okay, who's the best person in the world to talk to for my particular problem, and then I try to talk to this person and I try to learn from them. So ideally someone who's 10 years ahead of you and who really knows the field. Of course, if you reach out to those people, they are insanely busy and they will maybe not answer your first five messages, maybe. Even sometimes I got 3 intros, they didn't reply. But then I got very happy when I finally got a meeting. And but it doesn't mean that it will be for forever, or that this person will help you forever. But really learning from someone who did something very similar to what you do and getting advice from them. But of course, getting advice from the right people. Like there are, of course, also people that think they know, but the ones that have been proven it, that are the ones, but don't expect that they have a lot of time for you or so. So what I try then to do is also try to find a way to help them. So like that, I'm not like I'm just coming to them and I want something from them. That's very bad.
Yeah.
Like why should they do this? But rather maybe there's a way how I could, and then see, and maybe it turns out that they help me as well, maybe not. But definitely having the right mentors around is core, but also not too many. Because when you like at a certain point, I think we had too many mentors. um,
Oh
and
wow, that's a
they
good problem.
Yeah, but they are all super experienced and everybody has different experience. Then you have at the end 5, 6 different opinions. And at the end, you have to listen to yourself. They can all only give you a hint, a certain direction, but at the end, you have to make the call. But if you have too many opinions on it, it might be even harder. And yeah, and another thing that we actually implemented quite early on was that we have a coach for, let's say, so mental health things, but also if we, let's say, fight as co-founders at a certain point, so that we always have, let's say, a neutral person that we can talk to. So we implemented this very early. We didn't meet her very often, so we met her every, I don't know, 3 months maybe, so not too often. But if, let's say, how our first investor likes to put it, if shit hits the fan, then you are ready for this. And I think this is very important because there will always something happening. Like it will never stand still, and will be great maybe for a day or maybe for a week, but then things happen.
Yeah, there's always a fire. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always a fire, and it's just how you handle it. Sometimes you handle it better, sometimes not. So yeah, yeah.
And so some of the advisors that you recruited, were they cold reach outs or they were intros, warm intros?
Both. Oh, yeah, both. Like sometimes they came via network. So actually quite often, so Antler actually helped a lot to find the right mentors, like more like really industry leaders. But sometimes if no one has the relevant network to you, you need to build it. And then it's of course cold reach outs, but of course ideally you have a very particular reason. For example, in my case, I was looking for successful deep tech hardware founder, ideally who scaled someone within Germany and for a decade. And then when you try to look for this, then there are maybe a handful. And then you just need to find ways to get in touch with them and learn from them. But of course, it's still their experience is their experience. So you can listen to it, but it doesn't mean that you should take all of their advice. You should make the decision at the end yourself. It's just potentially helping you. Yeah.
Yeah, specificity is such a important thing in an ask. A lot of founders simply want to have an advisor, don't know why. It's good to start with the why and the specifics of what you need rather than, oh, will you be my advisor?
Yeah, there are some people, especially where you think, oh, they would be the perfect advisor for me. Then you talk to them and you realize, no, actually, their knowledge is maybe interesting and it's a very good experience, decades of experience, but maybe not what I need right now. And that's totally fine as well. So you should try to understand what you need, of course. So I'm totally with you. Yeah.
Well, for so much for taking the time and being on the podcast. Yeah, looking forward to what NeoCarbon brings out to the world.
Thank you, Vishesh. Was a pleasure, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. See you in the next episode.